the next morning he would ask the same question again. I would give him the same answer and tell him that I hoped it would be soon. The days went by until one morning my patient told me that he was done. You can't be done, I thought. You're still bleeding. But that didn't matter to him. He didn't want us to keep talking about new procedures and ordering blood transfusions. His arms were bruised from needle sticks. Every time we gave him a transfusion, his lungs filled with fluid, and he felt as though he were drowning until we gave him another medicine to make him urinate so that he could breathe again. He was 90 years old, and he was only getting weaker in the hospital, not better. Even though I knew that, even though I felt a little nervous and guilty when I saw him each morning, I found his words unexpected and somehow insulting. So I tried to negotiate. I told him that I was sorry we had kept him from eating for so many nights, awaiting procedures that inevitably occurred late in the day and sometimes not at all. I could bring him some food from the cafeteria, I offered, anything he wanted. I needed him to understand that if he stuck with us a bit longer, then maybe we could make him better. He didn't want our kind of better. He missed his home and his bed and his television and the way it was quiet at night and the sunlight crept in through his bedroom window each morning. It wasn't the house where he had raised his family, but still he had his chair in the living room and he had his books. So he shook his head no. He didn't want anything from the cafeteria. He just wanted to leave. Maybe he was depressed. I called the psychiatrist, half hoping that they would tell me he wasn't able to make his own decisions. They spent a long while in his room, and when they emerged, they were certain that my patient's mind was entirely sound. He understood the consequences. He understood that he would keep bleeding and slowly become weaker and more anemic, and that eventually he would die from the blood loss. Surprised and frustrated by their determination, I filled out the discharge paperwork that sent him on his way. I went over our final set of conversations for weeks. The way I saw it, my patient had come in with a problem that we weren't good enough to solve, so he had decided to go home where he would die. It was clear to me that we'd failed. I was surprised when, a few months later, a flower delivery arrived at the nurse's station on one of the general medical floors. There was a vase of lilacs, and with it, a note for me. It took me a moment before I registered the name and realized that the flowers were from my patient's son. Certain I had done something wrong and anxious about what I would find, I opened the envelope. I learned that with the aid of a hospice team, my patient had lived out his final days at home, as was his preference. His son was writing because he wanted to thank the doctors who'd taken care of his father during the last of his many hospitalizations. He had spoken highly of us, it turned out. He knew how hard it had been for us to see him leave, and he was grateful that we had. I read the note again. I think that might have been the first time I'd heard from a patient or his family after a hospital discharge. I know it was the first thanks that I'd received, and all this for a decision that hadn't even been mine to make. I took one of the lilacs with me and pressed it between the pages of the pocket-sized medicine text I kept in my white coat. The memory of this patient and his son's unexpected gift stayed with me. And as I returned to his story in the coming years, I began to see it in a different light. My elderly patient made the choice to leave the hospital so that he could live the way he wanted for whatever time he had remaining. Was that a failure, as I had assumed, or a kind of success? What did those words even mean? As I began to look farther down the road, at the longer-term reverberations and repercussions of our decisions, distinctions that had once seemed so clear started to blur. During those days of negotiation in my patient's room, I had believed survival was all that mattered. Maybe that is the way it must be for doctors at the very beginning. But survival was just the start. There was an entire range of possibilities and outcomes beyond the stark life-or-death dichotomy. Sitting in outpatient clinic offices and at the bedside on the general medical floors, I found myself wondering what my patients might face after they left my care. I wanted to know how they would learn to adapt to new realities, and whether they would regret the decisions they had made, or those that had been made for them. These are the questions that ultimately fueled the stories in this book. In the years since my first overnight in the intensive care unit, I completed my internship and internal medicine residency and went on to a pulmonary and critical care fellowship. I am now an attending physician in the intensive care unit at the hospital where I was born. In this position, I am the one who makes decisions about diagnoses and courses of treatment, leads family meetings, and carries responsibility for my patients' outcomes. Throughout the course of my training for this role, I have learned how to manage a ventilator, how to treat sepsis, and how to sort out the causes of renal failure. I have even learned to look at death, to be present in that moment when the body...